Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about rendering out a turntable animation. So basically it's kind of a little light introduction to the timeline down here. Uh, it's pretty straightforward. It kind of depends on basically whether you want to make the object turned or animate the camera. It's kind of up to you. Some variables that may affect that is the shadows. If you have really heavy shadows in your scene and you really don't want those things to move around and it just may be a lot more on your rendering time, you may want to think about animating a camera. But if you're kind of like this right here, you don't have a lot of background, you're not worried about your background, you're going to be rendering out without the background, and you just want the actual model to move, you could just basically animate the model, in other words. So thinking in terms of like not messing with my background, I'm going to be rendering out the background and you want it all to be the same. You got to remember whenever you do that um, with the actual model itself, you're going to be seeing what's on the background. So if you have an HDRI object, you're going to need to make sure that either that is blurred out kind of, or you can go down here and then turn your camera down. So key thing is have a camera in there. I have this camera here locked into place basically so you can't move it. Um, this is my resolution gate. I've kind of moved it back a little bit, so yeah, that's where it will be rendering out. Now what I'm going to do is say if I was wanting to not really worry about lights, or I just want to kind of contain my lights, but I didn't want my background kind of to be evident of what's going on. If I had like a light coming on the top or something like that, you could create like an environmental bowl basically to kind of cover it. I have a sky dome in here that lets off light, but if I didn't want that, then you could actually go and see, turn this resolution gate back off. Me delete this camera here, create a new one. Actually, let me create my kind of environmental thing right here. Kind of a quick way to do that is go grab a box and create a big environment. And if you go inside, the only thing about rotating around in this environment is you're going to see like the corners, which may or not affect you, but if you kind of want to make it just a straight bowl, you can kind of just smooth this thing over. Smooth, oops, not that, but this right here. Oh, that's weird. I want two divisions. Probably need more. There we go. So now I've got my environment here that I can scale up. You can either leave a floor plane in there, we still gonna see those hard edges. So if you want to take your floor plane away, in other words, he's just floating in space. But basically, you can kind of put your front view here and maybe flatten out the surface by selecting all these vertexes here. Scaling flat plane surface with the object. Snap that to the bottom right there. And if you go to perspective view and you go inside, now you've got this grid here that you can actually smooth preview over, and you've got like this nice curvature. You need to um, reverse the normals on here. Mesh display first. So whatever kind of texture you have on the inside. But bottom line is, if you went and did a regular render on that, you wouldn't really see a lot of contour in the background. And, obviously, if you did the Arnold render, you need to drop a light in there somewhere up top to kind of be subtle, because there would be no light in there. So if you're kind of going that route and you don't mind the background, here is some little camera tricks to animating a camera. I'm going to create a camera from view. Create camera from view. This is going to be my animated camera. Now looking through my animated camera, so if I were to go and let me hide this cube here real quick. Oh, it's Control E. There we go. Here's my camera right here. You see the way my top view up here, I'm moving it now. Now, introducing you to the timeline, you have this timeline. If you don't see it, go to your classic view. You can see it. There are animation ways, but I would stay away from that right now. I'm running at 120 frames right here. That should be enough, a couple seconds. If whenever you hit the timeline and it doesn't run, it's running really fast, then obviously you need to right click on the timeline, check your playback speed. Real time, sometimes the playback every frame is a little faster. Yeah, so you want to playback max real time. That's usually kind of how I'll start out with it. So if you just hit the play over here, now you've got your time frame. And what these is these are calculating each frames that will control into a second, like 24 frames per second, which what it should be set as. Yeah, 24 frames per second. That means for every second there's going to be 24 frames that flash. Thusly, whenever we create our sequences, it's going to create 24 frames for a second. Like it's going to render out 24 times, and that's going to calculate 1 second of a sequence. So in other words, say if you just wanted to animate a camera pass by, you have your camera, you go to your frame 1, if you hit S, it turns red. Now here's like 24, 1 second, and you move your camera into place, your pass by, and you hit S there. Now you have 2 red ticks, and if you notice over here, every single attribute related to it basically animated. That gives it made it a keyable object now. So if you were to scroll this object back and forth and hit the play button, now you've got a animated object that kind of moves. So in other words, if you want to animate this camera to be your turntable, if you want to be able to see the environment and you don't want to, you're comfortable with what the front view of your environment looks like, with the back view, and you don't want your shadows to move or anything, just take a camera in there. I'm going to delete this. Shift left click, and now it's all right. Now I can like delete keyframes. You could kind of like key this thing around there, but that's a little too much. Or kind of like key different angles. Sometimes the best way to do it is to use it like how the movies would film and use a track system. Path. So this is our ring that we want to animate around. We'll get about right there. Now I'm going to attach my camera to this path right here because this path goes all the way around it. In other words, so here's my camera. I'm going to select go to my animation tab, and what I'm going to do is, in rigging terms, I'm going to constrain this camera view to this path. In other words, so I'm select the camera, select the curve, constrain, and if you click the box here, this is where you can see, kind of get a handle on how things are going to roll, because sometimes if you were to have this thing wrong and it's not pointing at the actual object yourself, it may mess up, so you may have to adjust your axis right. So I'm just going to go ahead and attach. And voila, it's actually looking at that thing now. So basically, your camera is pointing to the z-axis. It's always going to look at the z-axis, and the fact that it's going to actually go around, is it's going to keep looking at that z-axis, so it's going to keep looking at that piece of geometry right there. Now, whenever you do that, whatever your timeline is how much percentage that's going to, because it's going to rotate all the way around this thing right here in 120 frames, in other words. So if you watch this scene right here, then watch I don't know if it'll do, I don't have to set it both views. to a little bit of like weirdness going on with it. I really like it. But the cool thing is you can kind of move this like a dramatic. Shift that a little bit. Go around. That is one way to do it. It's kind of a little bit more to it, in other words, which is why I show it to if you're doing the turntable, because sometimes a lot of students don't really want to involve like their backgrounds, or they like the way their backgrounds are, or they don't have a background in there and it doesn't really matter. They don't want their shadows to move. This is way will guarantee where that piece of geometry will not move. And there are ways to go about actually constraining this camera to the actual geometry if you created a different path and everything. That is one way to do it. So I'm going to back up and I'm going to show you how to create one. This thing is still constrained to it. There we go. When I kill this camera right here, create a new one. So I have a new camera here, and this is going to be, I'm going to render out. This is really the easy way to do this. Say you've created, you have your background, how you like it. Well, why not just, we animated the camera, well, why not just animate the basic piece of geometry, because it gives the illusion of turning around. Or if you have him on like a little pedestal that kind of spins around, you can animate the pedestal with the object. It's done the same exact way. You just need to make sure your pivot point is right in the middle. So the way to check that is to go to the front view. I'm going to rotate it on this Y rotation axis. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to press S. I'm going to go to my 120. I'm going to go to my Y value, because there's really no need to kind of turn this thing all the way around. You could do that, but I know I'm going 360 degrees, so I'm going to type in 360 degrees. I'm going to press S. Now I've created a keyframe there. But now if I turn this thing around, if you didn't want it going that way, you could go negative 360. You notice you kind of run your, I think why it's doing that is because I didn't have my actual pivot point right in the middle of the object, considered on the back heel of it, so it may look like it's kind of rotating to the front a little bit. Now if you notice another thing too, it looks like it's slowing in and slowing down. That's called ease in, ease out. It's automatically going to add to your animation keyframes. A way to get away from that, to make it look like it's constantly going. Go to your animation, or your windows up here, your animation editor, your graph editor. And this is your graph editor. This is heavily used in the animating of objects. You know, obviously you can see what's being animated. This is your value going from 0 to 360 on here, from this keyframe to this keyframe. You can go about selecting these keyframes and adjusting them. Well, if you notice, it's set on kind of a curve going in and going out. You need to set that as a straight line. So basically what I'm going to do is select these keyframes and go to a tangent key method. So if I close this out and now go back to the front, it's just a non-stop. And if you think it's running too fast or too slow, you can always go change your timeline. If I want to expand this out to 200, your keyframe is going to stop here. Your animation is going to stop there, but you can actually stretch these keyframes out if you just select that keyframe, hit shift, and with holding the left mouse key down, you kind of like you scroll to the front. Now you've got these handles here that you can kind of like scoot these things out. So now I'm scooting that keyframe out to 199 to 200. Let's go 199. Actually, 200. Or 199 maybe. So let's see what happens now. Actually, my timing is a little slow now. It's going up. Yep. Since this is set to 190. Actually, it's at 197. Selecting that keyframe and moving it. $199. Obviously, whenever you go to render out, you would, say you only going to go to 199 or wherever you scoot the keyframe to. So I'm going to back it back to 120, but that is an option if you want to slow your timeline up. All right. Let's see where I'm at with time. All right, so now you have everything how you like it. I'm going to go ahead and put ground plane back in here. Let me go and set my environment back up and I'll show you how to render the sequences out. Okay, so now I got my scene ready to go, my animation. It's how I want it. My turntable, my guy. Oh, I need to change that. Since I scooted it back down, I need to adjust the animation graph back down to tangent because I want it to be a constant. Okay, so a few settings we need to take care of before we send this thing to a render sequence. Your render setup. We want these image format to be PNGs. I mean, you can do JPEGs, or actually I do TIFF files because I wasn't having any luck with the background, but the TIFF files seemed like they were working for me. But you can definitely, if you have the background, definitely just go ahead and render out a JPEG, however you want to do it. But just remember, I don't want to use this background whenever I have my stuff rendered out. In other words, I want the black background because I want to go and actually add a background in post. So I'm going to leave it as a TIFF file. And what this is going to do, this is going to like shoot out a TIFF file for every frame. I'm going to go down here. This is my resolution. I'm not really worried about a big giant resolution image right now for this demo purposes, but for your nice stuff, I would at least go 1280 720. And the other thing too, this frame animation extension. This is important because whenever you import this into a software editing program, you're going to need to bring it in as a sequence. And what this does, this names every single frame in order so it can read it as a sequence. So I just go name extension. This is going to give it the name, basically your job name, the extension, or the number, and the extension of what it is. It's a PNG or the TIFF file. And here's another one too. Start frame. You want it to start on first frame, and then I was going all the way to 120. That's where I'm ending it at. So now I'm going to close that. I'm going to go up to my render tab, do render, Now, if you've been reading about the Arnold render, it's going to say, batch render, but batch render is going to leave you with a watermark. So there are ways around that. It's this render sequence, which is kind of relatively new, but not really. But open up this box here. Now, what this does, this sets what the camera you want to render out. I have my render camera set. I'm not moving it, but you can go and select the front. You just make sure it's on that render camera. If you want to send these file dumps to a certain alternative place, you can locate that. If not, it's going to send them basically to the job location of where you have your project set to. I have this project set on my desktop, so it's going to go to my my image folder, and create new folders probably. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to render sequence. So right now it is in the render. It's on the other screen. I guess I could cancel this, but you can't see it. So what I'm going to do is just pause the video. I have this thing set to wireframe render right now under my, because I'm rendering out different passes. So I'm just going to let this one run, and I'll show you where it's going to dump it to, and make sure this window is on this screen where the video is being played, because I can't move it now. I can't really touch Maya. So I'll pause this, and I'll see you in just a minute. Okay, so my wireframe stopped rendering. They render pretty fast. Now the reason I did wireframe is because I'm doing different sequences. I want to have basically 3 different sequences to kind of mesh together. So I'll show you how I went about doing that. I had the wireframe thing selected through the first tutorial on this pass, and I'm going to do an occlusion map and a diffuse map next. And where it dumped everything at is in my render demo project file. This is why it's important to have these project folders set. So in your images, it actually makes a wireframe folder with that camera, and it spit out 120 frames of that wireframe. You can spin around, in other words. So if you kind of look at these, kind of scroll through them, now you can see these sequences without the background. Give me all these TIFF files. So I'm just going to slowly do this one now. My occlusion. I'm going to check it up here in my Arnold just to make sure. And I am going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to my render sequence box up here. Make sure my camera's renderable. Everything is set to the same thing. I'm going to turn this off. Same thing to where my render start rendering out sequences now of that. So render sequence. And this is what was showing earlier that I couldn't view because it was on the other screen. So you notice now in that folder, my desktop of my project file, in my images, now it's already created a new OCC folder, and you'll see it's kind of slowly dumping occlusion map passes in there. And I'll pause it, and I will let this one run, and I'll look back when the next one goes. Okay, so my occlusion maps have rendered out. Just check. I'm going to go to my folder here, my image folders, my occlusion maps, occlusion folder. So I've got 120 images. They took a little longer than the wireframe, but not that long. And if you notice all these named extensions, if you're not familiar with like sequence orders, loading these things in, and I'll go over in the next tutorial how to load these things in After Effects, but they're numbered specifically. That was the purpose of renaming the extensions. So whenever I load these into After Effects, it basically doesn't load all these images. It loads them all, but it like creates its own sequence based on these numbers. And if you were to go and like rename these things, it would screw the sequence up. So it's best just to leave it alone. Keep them in a separate file where you can find them. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and render out my diffuse. And I'm just going to check it, make sure. And if I'm noticing it's taking, I'm kind of debating on ending this video with this because this is probably going to take a good 45 minutes to render out 120 of these. These usually are going to take the longest because it's rendering out, you know, the whole the beauty scene. So I think it's best if I go ahead and end this video now and continue with the next one when I have all the sequences done, but that's not too bad. So what I'll do is show you how to bring in these sequences and make like a cool little mesh together turntable presentation in using After Effects or well, you can use Premiere if you want to, or another video editing program, but all in all, this video has been concerning on creating a turntable animation. That's how you do it, and then to render the sequences out. Make sure you use your render sequence up here, not the batch render. You could do this with the camera animation instead, like we showed in the beginning, but I like doing it like this and not really worrying about a background, especially for just like a turntable, because I can kind of superimpose just a straight white background and like have less shadows to worry about and everything. So okay, well, in the next video we'll go over uploading these things. So see you then. Thanks for watching.